So, COVID 19 cases have been increasing consistently across the world, and India is no exception. But have you ever given a thought in these turbulent times when the healthcare system is being put to test? What is happening to the patients who are on the other side of the spectrum, a deadly disease like cancer? How are they managing in these turbulent times? Are they getting proper facilities, proper treatment? Are they getting doctors on time? Are they getting beds on time? Which is a big question. And to answer these questions and to have a conversation around everything non COVID in these COVID times, we have with us Dr. Ashok Vaid. Dr. Ashok Vaid, thank you so much for taking out your time. So,
Thank you, Love.
for introduction, Dr. Vaid is Chairman, Department of Medical Hemato-Oncology, Medanta, the Medicity, Gurgaon. Dr. Vaid is an Indian medical oncologist known for his pioneering efforts in bone marrow transplantation in India. He is credited with the performance of the first 25 bone marrow transplantations in the private sector in the northern part of India. Currently, he also heads the Cancer Institute, Division of Medical Oncology and Hematology at Medanta. Dr. Ved, thank you so much for your time. And I'm also joined by my editorial colleague, Rachit Gupta. My first question to you would be, how is the situation for everything non-COVID in these times? I mean, all the cancer patients, your patients, how are they dealing with it? And are there other resources, healthcare resources available at their disposal in these times?
Abhinav, the fundamental premise is that this is a very unique situation. And all of us know that this is an unprecedented situation where the lockdown has made the movement of patients so difficult from one state and one city to another. So that's in a way compromising the access of these patients to good health care. Now imagine in a city like Delhi, there are currently talking about cancer. I'm a cancer specialist, so my area of interest always would be cancer only. There are at least about 25 to 30 cancer centers in the private sector. And the Delhi NCR is not the only population on which these cancer centers are dependent upon.
Sure.
Obviously, there is a huge sizable population of patients who travel hundreds and thousands of miles up from northeast, all the way from Assam, from Kashmir to so many parts of the country to Delhi to access good cancer care. But the biggest constraint has been the inability of the patients to travel. And a lot of these patients were under treatment in many centers in Delhi, and obviously many centers around the northern part of the country in states like UP. Lucknow has a lot of cancer centers. Even Kanpur now, Allahabad, all these places have. And when the movement is hampered, so first and foremost is those patients who are on treatment, it hampers them. Number two, anybody being diagnosed or suspected to be suffering from cancer cannot undergo the full array of diagnostic procedures.
Right.
Imagine somebody has a 2-centimeter lump and has to wait for 8 weeks. How terrible it is. We have had examples where patients were under the investigations, got their biopsy, could not get their PET scans done, could not get the staging done, and patients have progressed from an early stage to a very advanced stage. And in a couple of occasions, even to a position of being untreatable. So this is terrible. This is something which is, very difficult to cope up with.
My question is that how many patients do you have in your personal capacity? I mean, any number?
So almost about 50% of the patients are not able to access the hospital. Because as I gave an example of Delhi NCR, the problem is that the Delhi NCR hospitals treat almost 50% of the patients who come from outside, from other parts of Haryana, Punjab, J&K, Himachal, UP, and all Uttarakhand.
And
lot of.
Sure. And what is the mental state of such patients? I mean, in times like these, they are not able to access basic healthcare and not able to access their doctors on time. And you can only imagine the plight of such people.
So there is a lot of anxiety, and we are doing a lot of video consults, e-consults, telephonic to connect with us, because we at Medanta we have a very robust e-platform to do the video consults, and we are doing plenty of them on a daily basis. And we can see the anxiety that doc, I'm not able to come for my follow-up, my X-rays, my CT scans, or my other scans are still pending. And even more than that, access to investigation, sometimes access to drugs, actually, that they are not able to, they're run short of the medications, and that's compounding the problem. So it's a multi-dimensional, it's a multifaceted issue.
Sure.
Okay, doctor. Of course, like you mentioned that the non-COVID patients are really paying the price right now, given the situation. Right. So once things start going back to normal, once the non-COVID patients are being attended by hospitals and doctors, don't you think there's going to be much more pressure on the hospitals as compared to now? Because there's going to be a large influx of patients suddenly on a sudden manner, and the hospitals and doctors might not be able to take up the pressure, or will they be able to take up the pressure?
Absolutely, Rachit. That's a very valid point, and a concern in the minds of the doctors working in any hospital, because the capacity to see these patients is only up to a certain point, and once the interstate movement starts, all those who have been waiting for the last couple of months would want to visit their doctors, have a chat with them, do their pending tests, replenish their medication supplies, and it's an issue. But then I can tell you that the capacity to take on more is always there, and doctors would walk the extra mile, not only an extra step, but the extra mile, and especially in a disease like cancer, where the anxieties run deeper, and one has to be more empathetic at the same time. So we at this end, we are prepared to take that the influx of those patients, provided the ability is there to come to the hospital. But of course, it's going to be a challenge of another type. But I can assure you and everyone around that hospitals are thinking about it and gearing themselves up.
Dr. Vaid, you gave example of Italy and US and how non-COVID patients are being catered to in those markets. Where do you think we went wrong or we got it wrong? What could have been done better in the hindsight if you look at the situation to balance the COVID patients as well as non-COVID patients? Is there something which needs to be intrinsically dealt with within our healthcare system?
So, there wouldn't be any right or a wrong answer to that. I think we should have, let's take example of Italy first. The cases came in thick and fast, and the hospitals didn't have capacity. So everyone became a COVID doctor, whether he was a cancer specialist or a cardiac specialist or a neurophysician, they all became COVID doctors because the numbers swelled up so quickly. That way, India is on a better footing. Our cases have climbed up very gradually from a few hundred in the initial weeks of February, March, to 150,000, close to 150,000. We have taken our time to build up those cases. The worry is if in the coming months, we also start getting cases of the enormity what Italy saw, then all our hospitals will have to be turned into COVID hospitals. And all of us will have to work as COVID doctors rather than work as cancer specialists or XYZ specialists. Now, in dealing with whatever load we have, I think it may be a good idea to segregate the hospitals, COVID versus the non-COVID hospitals. Because if you bring in everyone into the same facility, you are potentially exposing the non-COVID patients to the probability of getting COVID in that facility. So it would be a good idea to have COVID versus non-COVID so that the heart patients, the cancer patients, and neurology and everybody else doesn't suffer. Their work continues. I think that's something we could have looked at, preparing ourselves. Maybe in March and April, there could have been a strategy to that. But now the government is saying that 20% in Delhi and NCR, everybody is saying that 20% of the beds would be allocated to COVID patients. Now that amounts to mixing these two.
Like you mentioned, how in countries like Italy, all the doctors were actually they actually became COVID doctors. So we are 2 months into the lockdown in India, and recently we have also seen a huge spike in the daily count of COVID cases in India. Like I think day before yesterday, we had seen 6,000. The number of 6,000. I mean, the cases increased by the number of 6,000.
Right.
So we are 2 months into the lockdown, and as we have progressed, we are only seeing the cases rise. So is there anything that we are not doing apart from staying home and maintaining social distances? And is this having a different effect on all the medical students in India? I mean, because this is an era where the medical students have not faced of the previous generation. The previous generation medical students have not faced such a kind of a situation. So is there anything different when it comes to the medical students, the experience of medical students?
Let me answer that in two parts. Number one, what is the ideal model? Nobody knows. Look at Japan. Japan never did anything. They allowed everything to run. They allowed everything to happen. They did impose an emergency, lifted it just maybe yesterday. And still their numbers have been actually very, very reasonable in terms of the total numbers, in terms of the mortality. Look at the other side of the spectrum is what happened in the US. US also didn't do anything. They didn't lock down. They didn't do maybe some sort of restrictions, but the numbers are in 1 million plus. Now, which is the right model to follow? Nobody knows that. Korea did a lot of testing. Germany did a lot of testing. Japan didn't do that much of testing. So I think what has contributed to the late surge in the cases is the initial phase of the lockdown did us good. But when the movement of the factory workers, all the farm workers, all that started, I think that is where the numbers all started jumping up. Maybe we could have actually, when we did a lockdown, instead of 4 hours, we could have said that 24th to 31st of March, we press the reset button. Anybody and everybody who wants to go anywhere, which is what we are now allowing to happen. We are allowing them to travel by air, by trains and everything. Those week or 10 days, everybody would have gone away, and then the entire testing paradigm could have kicked in. And all this distress wouldn't have happened. See, the social medical distress maybe would have been less. But then there is only one perfect science in this world, and that is hindsight. You go back and make a judgment. And at that point in time, it seemed that the first two phases of the lockdown really did well. And it's unfortunate that our numbers are now going up, and the peak is, we don't know when the peak is going to be there. So that's one part, that what could have been done different. Now looking back, yes, this could have been a little different. And then the second is that lockdown is for people like you and me who have a house, who have an income, who have some bank balance. You put a lock and lock me inside. All these workers never had a house, never had a steady income. Half of them were daily wages. Where do you lock them down? You can only lock them down for 24 hours, 48 hours, about a week or 10 days. They have to then come out. The second part is a very pertinent part about the medical students not being exposed. My generation, I passed out in the 80s. So we have never been exposed during our training days. And even in the last 35 years, I've been a doctor. So I've never been exposed to an enormity of this type. An invisible enemy, which is, there is no treatment, there is no vaccine, and it's something, a bolt from the blue. Suddenly you have to adapt to new way of working, new way of behaving, new way of even treating your patients. Your elderly cancer patients, those who have cardiac disease, those who have any other medical ailment, we are putting them on maybe some sort of oral therapies, telling them don't come to the hospital, send your reports on the mail or do an e-consult. We were not doing this 3 months back. So huge amount of learning, and I would say the current generation of students would be at an advantage because they would learn what we learned, and they would learn a lot more than what we did not learn. And then their exposure to this type of a pandemic is, I think, very unique. and then they would be in a better position to deal with such situations in the future.
Sure. Now, Dr. Ved, you said that you have been in this area for the last 35 years, if I get that correctly. So you are in a relatively very senior position to, answer this question. What are some intrinsic flaws in India's healthcare system, which can help us deal with pandemics like such? Because we are a developing nation, we are also the youngest country in the world, and it's not, God forbid, this is not the last time we are dealing with such a pandemic. I mean, some things like this might occur in the future as well. So, what should India do to, revive its healthcare system? Is it budget allocation? Is it the quality of doctors? Do we need? Is it high time to get rid of the quota system in the medical field? What should we do? How should we deal with the future?
Absolutely, Abhinav, you have brought out a point which is very, very pertinent. Now, there is a interview by the Wuhan, the lab from where the research on the coronavirus is happening, and the lady who's called as the Batwoman, Xi Jinping, she just made a statement, I think this morning only, that coronavirus is only the tip of the iceberg. There are many viruses we don't know, we don't understand, and the world should prepare itself for better, and there should be a better understanding amongst nations and physicians to deal with these pandemics in the future. Now, coming back to the Indian healthcare system, Abhinav, it's a very unique story about India, and that's my very personal view. We don't know what we are. Are we a socialist country? Are we a capitalist country? Are we a communist country? What is it that we stand for?
We are largely opportunists. We are largely opportunists, but we can have a separate conversation over that.
Yeah. No. When a leader is standing in my village back home, then he speaks socialism. When he's in a suburb of Bombay, he would speak of something capitalism. So we don't know. We are a confused lot, and this confusion pervades. I tell you, this pervades into every walk of life. Look at our healthcare system. Sorry to say, my surname is Vaid, and it's not my caste. It comes from my family title. I come from a family of Vaids, and then my daughter, who's a doctor, is the 7th generation recorded medical professional in my family. So we come from the family of Ayurveds, and I understand Ayurveda much better than many people around, though I am an allopathic doctor. But look at what health ministry is doing. You have a department of Ayush. Ayush should be run more like a very professional way, not what existed 3,000 years back. So that's the confusion. When I say the confusion pervades every walk of life, our expectations, goals are different, our means and methods are very different to achieve those. Because what we tell the public and what we discuss privately are two very different things. Now look at the history of medical profession in this country. So 1947, we inherit the system from the Britishers, and it was largely based on a mix of the Ayurvedic and the allopathic. Of course, they built up those famous medical colleges, the Madras Medical College, 1837, Amritsar Medical College, 1920. So they built up those medical colleges, and a lot of them came up. And by about 1980, there were about 210 of them. Now, 80s was the turning point. 80s was the turning point because medical profession was seeing an influx of technology. And our medical colleges, who were largely servicing the public, were good for primary, secondary, and low and tertiary care. Mark my words. Most of the medical colleges did not even have an intensive care unit. Even today, a lot of medical colleges don't have the type of intensive care unit they should have.
Correct.
So as technology was creeping in, the government was not able to infuse that technology. So they got stuck in the time warp. And now 90s enters the private sector. And all these, Medanta, Fortis, Max, and everything, Apollos, they come in the 90s and the last decade. But then we did not know that what is their positioning? What is their contribution going to be to the healthcare over a long period of time? 30 years, 50 years, what is going to happen? They were allowed to come up, not establish medical schools. Medical schools are only allowed to be established by not-for-profit organizations who set up those medical schools in rural areas where there were no patients. Patients were only brought, dummy patients were brought only for the MCI inspections. That happened with the dental colleges, that happened with the medical colleges. Now, come the last decade, the government could not expand capacity and did not allow the private sector to flourish. It was kept on a tight leash. The government did not have the money or the capacity.
The resources.
There is a very resources. There was a very old E&Y report. I think you could access it somewhere. This was in the year 2003 or 2004. And they premised that in the next 10 years, India would buy, this is by 2014 or 2015, India would need 1 lakh crore rupees to be infused into healthcare to bring it to a certain level. And out of which the government could only afford 20,000 crores. Where would the rest of the 80,000 crore come from? If the government would understand that, why not allow the private sector in a controlled manner to get into medical education, raise the bar, raise the standards? So today, if somebody falls sick, where does he go? Living in Delhi, Bangalore or Hyderabad, we are still fortunate to access tertiary care.
So you're saying there is a lack of planning and eventual goal allocation?
Absolutely. Abhinav, आप लोग बहुत यंग हो, आपको मालूम नहीं होगा.
Thank you. मैं छाती चौड़ी करके बाहर निकलूंगा.
जब जनता सरकार बनी थी, तो Raj Narayan was the health minister. It's a tragedy. You could Google or you could ask the health ministry to give you some information on that. So Raj Narayan ji gaye UK tour pe gaye, and there was a company which used to manufacture mobile medical units, big buses, huge monstrous buses. So I'm forgetting, I think Bradford. So he visited the factory, he saw a unit, he got very impressed by that. I'm again bringing the confusion part into the discussion because हमें clarity नहीं है हम क्या चाहते हैं. So when he saw that, he said, "Oh, this is wonderful. ये हमें भारत लेके जाना है." And he turned back and asked the senior functionary कि हमारे कितने medical colleges हैं. उन्होंने कहा जी 206. And he turned back. He said, "We need 206 buses." They said 6 buses. Even in 6 buses, they were excited with that order. When they heard about 206 buses, the company which was जो डूबने वाली company थी, it gave a lease of life for the company for the next 20 years. वो buses हम लेके आए, उन सड़कों पे चलाई जहाँ सड़कों पे वो fit नहीं थी चलने की. I sometimes wonder how countries like France, from all European countries, how do they guarantee healthcare to their citizens? In India, we just cannot. एक किसी को decent पट्टी करानी है, अभी किसी को चोट लग जाए, he has no clue where to go.
India is a country where we have 5.5 government beds per 10,000 people, and at the same time, we see 60% of deaths in India are caused by non-communicable disease, and the root cause of non-communicable diseases happen to be environmental pollution, our dietary reasons, like the way we eat, what we eat, and the way we eat them, and rapid urbanization. Then, I mean, if there's a problem from all the sides, then aren't we supposed to? Isn't the government supposed to take care of all the awareness programs in a much more stronger way when it comes to non-communicable disease? Because a large majority chunk of deaths happen due to these diseases, and you are an oncologist, you are dealing with a lifestyle disorder.
No doubt about that, Rachit. Our lifestyles would catch up with those of South Korea between about 2030 to 2040. So another about 20 years, we would reach 20 to 30 years, we would reach the lifestyles of South Korea if we continue to develop at a pace of about 8 to 10% GDP.
So what is that lifestyle you're referring to? I mean, for the viewers.
Lifestyle means the housing, the sanitation, the urbanization, cleanliness, environmental, all these things would get better by over a period of time.
Okay.
But I'm not sure because we are not developing at a pace at which we were supposed to.
Because ultimately,
Talking about cancer, our peak of the cancer cases is going to come by about 2040, 2050. We are still on the up. We have not plateaued off. Now, as you very rightly, you hit the nail on the head, that it's our lifestyle, our dietary, our urbanization, tobacco. Tobacco is one of the major killers. 40% of the cancers are directly, indirectly linked to tobacco. And also, deaths from cardiovascular diseases have a huge tobacco input to that. The respiratory, chronic pulmonary disease, COPD, all these factors are tobacco dependent. Now, NCDs, the non-communicable diseases, are going to be, they already are only going to become sharper in their focus, but our planners are nowhere there. So it's again a shortcoming of the planning.
And we are the youngest population in the world.
So it's a huge worry, how India is going to actually evolve out of this. And talking about cancer, today there are 17 lakh new cancer cases every year. Cancer is not a notifiable disease, therefore we don't know the exact numbers. And if you talk to oncologists around, anybody like me would tell you that it's not 17 lakh per year. It's much more than that. People getting diagnosed in remote areas are not logged into a register. People not getting diagnosed, dying of a mysterious illness, they could have had cancer. The numbers are very high. And the capacity to treat cancer patients today is just about 40%. Tomorrow morning, if every cancer patient decides that I have to report to a cancer hospital, there is capacity only for 40%. We need close to about 1,500 cancer centers in this country. And then today we are just sitting at about 600 odd cancer centers. So there is a huge, a gap between the planning and the understanding of the whole. Though lately the government has established the National Cancer Institute, given a lot of grants, but then this may not suffice.
And this refers to the common internet questions which we come across. So on other side, just for the curiosity's sake, do you think that corona has been invented in the lab? As a doctor, what's your opinion on that? I mean, there are a lot of conspiracy theories floating on the internet, but as a doctor, what do you think of this opinion?
So to stay politically correct and medically correct,
you're fueling the conspiracy. You're not controlling it. As a doctor, this is not correct. Had I been at your place, I wouldn't have done that.
I strongly suspect that this is not a natural thing which is floating around. Somebody has tinkered and somebody has done a mischief out here. Somebody's done a mischief.
Okay. And what is this? The whole fuss about the drug hydroxychloroquine.
So,
I mean, the world is literally divided right now. On one hand, you see the doctors and the experts from WHO saying that it's still an anecdotal thing to say that.
Not WHO, it's Anthony Fauci only. Huh?
Yeah, Anthony Fauci and his peers at WHO, if I may say so that way. And there are some private practitioners, especially coming out from the US, who are actually saying that it has proven to be quite helpful drug for treating certain.
There are multiple facets to it. It's a drug which actually in the body it modulates the immune system, and we use this drug. Even as a cancer specialist, I don't use it much, but only in very unique situations. But my colleagues from the rheumatology department, they use it quite often. Now, there are differing reports about it, and recent study by the WHO has been suspended actually. And that's the efficacy part of it, the effectiveness part of it. But the ICMR says that it's been effective. I think allow a little more time for all these studies to be printed, to be published. But To the general public, I would say that don't take it under any whims or fancies. Take it only under medical supervision. There are some side effects to this.
Of course, I mean, this is not an over-the-counter drug that you can just pop around like a Hajmola, right?
So yeah. We actually, I have been called up many times by some of my patients that can I take this drug, and even friends and family, they've been calling on. But consistent advice is that it has to be taken under medical supervision. It's not a paracetamol or a headache drug. To take it seriously.
Okay, another $1 million question. How effective are masks while we go out?
So, absolutely, they are effective. They are effective.
And do you think people staying in their homes will eventually bring down their social immunity? I mean, by the time we come out of lockdowns, we haven't had human-to-human interaction over the last 4 to 6 months, which eventually does increase our immunity. So, do you think number of diseases after this lockdown phase, people suffering from diseases like tuberculosis and more communicable diseases, this number is expected to go up?
Yeah, physical. There is a fairly good amount of physical degeneration. How many of us at home have those fitness equipments and keeping ourselves fit? And how much can you walk in a house, especially in the metropolitan cities, where the housing is absolutely in a small space. Sure. And the physical degeneration, diabetics need to watch out. They need a fairly good amount of activity per day. The cardiac patients, the hypertensives, they need to walk. So all this, and more than that, the mental as well.
Trust me, Dr. Ved, when somebody sitting in Delhi NCR says कि घर कितने बड़े होते हैं, हम कितना चल पाएंगे? Imagine people living in Bombay,
Wow, that's even more difficult.
They don't even walk. I mean, even if they fart, the other person hears. So
the neighbor hears.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a real issue. It's a real issue, and people with joint problems, with the muscles and all those, they need to be watchful about it.
Sure.
Kind of banking on a fear psychosis in the society with respect to COVID. Because the media is full of negativity nowadays, and even if there's a glimmer of hope, even if there's a glimmer of positivity in some research or study, that is barely covered by the TV media or even by the newspapers. And even if it's covered by the newspapers, it will be on some very small dark corner of that paper.
Niche platform, and it's usually shunned down. So do you think fear psychosis works better in this environment?
So fear psychosis to an extent, but I can tell you, Abhinav, this is my observation of the last 2 months. I thought our behavior, our response to certain things would change over a period of time. I wouldn't say it has diametrically changed. People still need to be told that social distancing is required, even in the clinics, even in our hospitals. I have to yell at many people every day that pull up your mask, stay a little distance away. People still have a fairly good amount of casual approach to it. And then you asked about the mask. Mask is definitely on. Mask, distancing and hygiene, MDH. This is what I tell every patient coming into my clinic, that MDH. MDH is a famous name. You will not forget it. Masking, distancing and hygiene. I think these are the 3 things without publicizing the company which stands for it.
सब लोग आपको MDH वाले अंकल बुलाते होंगे.
थोड़े दिन में आपका ही फोटो आने वाला है वो अंकल के बाद में बताओ.
Absolutely. I'm sure.
So Dr. Ved, this was very insightful. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope that we come out of this crisis soon. But do you have any suggestions for people who are non-COVID patients and are struggling with a lot of trauma right now, a lot of turbulence in their mind right now? Do you have any word for them? Just a signing off note.
A couple of things. Avoid unnecessary visits to the hospitals. Avoid what is avoidable. Now, but that's a big statement. How to decide what is avoidable? Now, going for a casual blood test or a checking a blood pressure or a blood sugar might not be on, because you are getting exposed to that environment, because this is a population which is anyway older, which has comorbidities, and then they are more vulnerable. So avoid what is avoidable. I think that's the tagline I would say. And what is essential should not be avoided. Should take precedence, and then access the treatment. if somebody's got a chest pain, don't dismiss it as an acidity sitting at home and keep popping the pills for the next several hours before you crash. So what needs attention must get attention, seek attention, and try and access your doctors and your hospitals as much on the e-platforms, over the phone, over the WhatsApp, over video consults. All major hospitals have now started all this, and hundreds of video consults we are doing. Medanta is doing on a daily basis. So, and then of course, take care, hygiene and masking and distancing to everyone. Abhinav, I just allow me 30 seconds. When we were talking about the healthcare system in India and what are the ills about it, I recently in the Deccan Chronicles, I wrote an article that post-COVID, countries which will be science-driven will rule this world, and I'll share that link with you. And I've given a couple of examples there. Why America is the medical powerhouse of the world today? Believe me, 80% of the leads in medical science, they come from the US. Europe is today only contributing about 25%. Why are they? The right thing they did? All labs, I have written in that article, all big research labs, they link to major hospitals like the Mayo Clinic, like the Massachusetts General Hospital, to other hospitals. So any molecule which was discovered, which was thought to be a useful molecule, was taken to a finality by the clinicians, discovered in the lab, processed by the clinicians, whether it is a drug or not. And this is what can happen in India also. We have a Council of Scientific Industrial Research. You know how many labs they have? 37. And their capabilities are godly. I'm not joking. Their capabilities are godly. They are Sarkari establishments, but their capabilities are huge. What happens is they discover a molecule, it goes to a certain degree of development and dies off. Uska paper chap jata hai, unko increment mil jata hai, next promotion mil jata hai, and it dies off. Link it to Tata Memorial Hospital, to All India Institute of Medical Sciences, PGI Chandigarh, Medanta, Fortis and Max. All these molecules will become drugs, and India will have an answer to a lot of its ills. How many drugs we have invented? How many drugs we have given to the world till date in the last 50 years? Zero, none. No innovation in this country. Why innovation is not happening is why? Because we are not a science-driven country. और confusion की हद आपको बताऊं, Indian Science Congress होता है, वहां हम कहते हैं कि 5000 साल पहले हम ये करते थे. It's all irrelevant today. This is what the confusion is in our minds. We don't know what we want to be and what are the means and methods to be, to that individual. मैं आपको link भेजूंगा, जरूर पढ़िएगा उसको.
Actually, this has prompted me to ask one more question, by the way, which I wanted to clear with you. I want to know, why is it that we are constantly complaining about the health infrastructure of India, and yet India is known for its medical tourism? People from across borders are coming to India for various set of treatments.
Excellent question. The precise answer, you don't have greenery everywhere. There are only about 10, 15, 20, 25 centers who are drawing more than 70-80% of these patients into India. Rest of Indian healthcare is all subpar. And credit the private sector for bringing this up. All these complex cases, all those cases who are not managed out there are coming to India. People are doing dual transplants at the same time, kidney and liver transplant. People are doing heart and lung transplants. People are doing bone marrow transplants. All that was not possible in the government setup. There was no capacity with the government. So, but this is a handful of centers. You can put that list, and only one sheet is enough to put that list. You don't need the second page.
These handful of centers are expected to hold a 20% market share in worldwide.
Exactly. That answers the question that what are the ways forward? If they could deliver to someone coming from Africa and coming from Central Asia, why can't we deliver it to someone?
Absolutely, that's a valid question. Yeah.
That's ironical, as typical as we are as a nation. But Dr. Vaid, thank you so much. This was very insightful. And for the link which you were talking about, we will be posting this video, and you can share the link below it. so it's accessible to most of the readers and viewers who come and watch this interview. Dr. Vaid, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for talking
Thank
to
you,
us.
Abhinav.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Doctor.
Rakesh. Great time. Thank you. Bye bye. Take care.